members of the Defense Council
und der ausländischen Arbeiter zu sorgen. Gott schütze ein über alles geliebte Volk.
Всякий преднамеренный захват, истребление.
Are you seriously asking the tribunal to believe that you were so much concerned with the defense of Germany against Lithuania during these years?
I started school in Saarbrücken, first grade. After 1 year, I had to switch to a Jewish school. Obviously, we didn't recognize what war would mean or that there would be a war. We just knew we weren't wanted. Being sent to a different school was a big sign. Hitler was already in power, so in 1935 we moved to Luxembourg. So we lived in Luxembourg for 3.5 years, and then when we left, that was a rather scary occasion. My maternal grandmother and my mother's 2 sisters went to Holland, and they never made it out. And when I said goodbye to my grandmother, it was one of those occasions that I cried. I seldom cried, but I must have known that I wouldn't see her again. In 1938, in October, we arrived here on the New Amsterdam. And we were supposed to go to Buffalo, where I had an uncle and family. But then my mother decided to stay in New York, which was stressful, mostly because we didn't speak English. Washington Heights in New York, all the immigrants went there. And people call it the Fourth Reich. Well, my mother had enough sense to move out of there and go to the Bronx. She wanted us to be in a more American environment, and the people in the house were mostly Irish, so they were our friends. People were always very nice to me, the teachers, other students, neighborhood kids. The only problem was I was different. People ask me what I was, a German Jew, but I don't feel German. But I would never deny being Jewish. I'm proud of it.
Hearing the good news of Germany's surrender, these men and women completed an extra B-29 Super Fortress. They cheer the great bomber on its way to blast Japan. From now on, the only target for United States military might.
I was saved by President Truman in 1945 when he asked me to serve in the Army. And the story goes that the war was still raging in the Pacific, but Hirohito heard I was coming and he surrendered. That's my war story. I was trained for the Pacific, but then they changed it, and we went directly to Germany by ship. When we left the States, in New York Harbor they had signs, "Welcome home, boys, job well done." And we weren't going to be heroes. Landed Christmas Eve, it was freezing cold. It was so cold, some of the GIs tore the paneling off the train compartments and built a fire. So you had a choice of choking to death or freezing. And I looked out the window and I wondered what it would be like to be in a foxhole. And for the first time, I was glad I wasn't a hero.
stormed out Nuremberg, preparations go forward for the trials of Germany's major war criminals, and the shrine of Hitler's Nazism becomes its tomb. In Nuremberg's court building, where the trials will be held, German prisoners work at enlarging and rebuilding the courtroom. Under American supervision, they install broadcasting booths and press facilities to carry the proceedings throughout the world.
They sent us to a town called Erlangen, and there was a Reppeldepot, which is what they called a replacement depot. So they called me in and they said, well, what do you want to do? Signal Corps, Medical Corps? Oh, you speak German, you're going to Nuremberg. And they sent me there, and then they told me that I would be censoring mail. And what we were supposed to look for were signs of escape, which was ridiculous because the prison was very secure. There were all kinds of guards around. And the second thing was signs of suicide. And the third was eliminating crank letters, especially Germans writing to the Nazis, blaming them for losing the war. Things addressed to the big fat pig, Hermann Goering. People who were in concentration camps, survivors, people who lost relatives in the camps, often sent letters with black borders, which is when you send condolence letters in Germany or announcements of deceased. We had a psychiatrist and a psychologist who didn't want them upset. So we censored those. When I got there, my feelings were that they should all be hanged. Not just the major criminals, all of them. And yet I never attacked an individual. But the Germans as a people, I thought they should all hang. And I changed that much later in life when I became a little more tolerant of human beings.
In order to set up a new political administration and an administration that would operate peaceably so the territory could be exploited, Hitler was very anxious to stamp out those parts of the population who would oppose his aims, wasn't he? Those elements in the population.
Trials took place in the Palace of Justice, and it was connected to the prison by a covered wooden walkway. So when one of the accused or a witness was summoned to the courthouse, they came through this passage guarded by one of the Baltic guards. And one memory I have was that during the big trials, I was taking the mail to the prison, and Goring was coming the other way. And I stepped aside to let him pass. And that bothered me still, that I was intimidated enough to let him by.
At Nuremberg, the judges enter to hear the case for the defense in the war crimes trial. On the witness stand is Hermann Wilhelm Goering, leading living exponent of the Nazi philosophy and outstanding defendant among the score on trial. It is Goering's turn to testify and to answer the questions of Justice Robert Jackson, United States prosecutor. The courtroom is hushed. Hess, Ribbentrop, Stryker, and the others of the Hitler gang are tensely interested. In cross-examination, following Goering's 55,000-word prepared speech, Justice Jackson questions him.
All of them had families. They were allowed 2 letters a week. People like Keitel and Jodl, who were the generals, complained to their families, saying they don't mind dying, but they don't want to be hanged because, of course, that's a great dishonor. Alfred Ley was the Minister of Labor. He wrote to Henry Ford, asking that Henry Ford intervene, and he points out that I did nothing wrong except to talk against the Jews, knowing that Ford had done the same thing. And Goering was very fond of his wife, but he had a little girl who at the time was 9, and they wrote to each other. The relationships with the families, very close.
On October 1st, 1946, the verdict is delivered by Lord Justice Lawrence, President of the Tribunal.
Wilhelm Hermann Goering, Julius Streicher, Alfred Jodl, Wilhelm Keitel, Joachim von Ribbentrop, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging.
People who were responsible for literally exterminating hundreds of thousands of people could write to their children and their wives, and they to them, in loving family terms, real family values. That was a big mystery, and still is.